So I think I'll start without wasting any more time. And at the onset, I would like to thank Dr. Srinivas, the team Cyclops, Dr. Pradeep from Asian ENT Hospital, the chairman of Asian ENT Hospital, Dr. Raju, to have given me this opportunity to be here in this wonderful city of Visakhapatnam and to give it a try to talk to you about it, about something that is a little difficult for me also. When you're managing patients of vertigo, I think all of us face situations when we say, what should I do? Now I don't have a clue as to what I have to do with this patient, how to go about it. Well, who all can say this? Like, I don't have a clue. Someone who doesn't want to see dizzy patients, good ENT surgeons, busy practice, don't want to see them. So fine. The second category would be of guys who would be happy with an easy diagnosis but ready to give it up when cornered with a difficult situation. The third category is of people like us present in this hall who want to explore the science of neurotology. We too sometimes have such difficult situations. But for us, being clueless is not an excuse. Patient can present to us with, various symptomatologies, and there are very different kind of ways he can say, I'm suffering like tilting, dizzy, rocking, spinning like a what not. But then for the sake of simplicity and to be able to understand things better, we categorize vertigo as either a rotatory vertigo where the room spins for the patient or the patient spins. And this situation is related either to the semicircular canals or to the central nervous system. But then dizziness, a generalized dizziness is a much more difficult situation to define. And it's not exclusive to the inner ear or the CNS and could span n number of specialities. We have seen a big change in the kind of scenario we have from what we had, I could say, even 10 years back. We have wonderful newer modalities for diagnosis, and one great example is the Cyclops balance eye, of course. And you have newer treatable syndromes which have been very recently labeled as a diagnosis, like vestibular migraine, and the multiple variants of BPPV, including anterior canal and multiple canal that we have become aware of now. Well, the patient can present to us in 5 different situations. One is a single or a first attack of prolonged vertigo, recurrent attacks of vertigo, recurrent attacks of dizziness, positional vertigo, or a chronic long-lasting dizziness. So we'll take them up one by one. And the first attack of acute prolonged vertigo is something that is often seen in the emergency room, and that's when it's very crucial. Missing a posterior fossa stroke in such a situation would be a disaster. Well, most strokes are due to ICA or PICA, and when they present with the full spectrum, not difficult to define them as stroke. But subtle partial manifestations can be very tricky, and those are what I'm going to quickly go through. Another thing is that when a specific vascular territory is implicated, then the clinical signs are pretty clear. But with non-vascular lesions like demyelination, they can produce individual deficits, isolated deficits, which can be difficult to understand. So basically, this first attack patient would present to us with vertigo associated with nausea and vomiting, and also some sort of imbalance. The possible diagnosis would be vestibular neuritis, acute brainstem, or a cerebellar lesion, either a stroke or a demyelination. And herpes zoster urticus, first attack of vestibular migraine, a first attack of Meniere's, or a labyrinthine infarction. So the first aim is to differentiate between a peripheral and a central pathology. I'll not go into details of hints, but I just wanted you to see the skew deviation here in this patient. So you have to look for a skew deviation also, which directly points towards a central lesion. Okay. Well, a central disorder would definitely present with much more prominent ataxia as compared to a peripheral disorder. And in the oculomotor testing, you'll get a broken pursuit, asymmetric saccades, and there'll be limb ataxia, dysarthria, dysphagia, and weakness or a sensory loss. What is really important and which most people miss out is the defective VOR suppression. And this happens only in central disorders. It will be definitely spared in a peripheral disorder. So what you get is corrective saccades, and these indicate a defective VORS. And this is very simple to do. In this case, the demo is while standing. Just ask the patient to hold an object in his hands and move the object and his head and keep his eyes focused on the object. And in case you get corrective saccades, you're looking at a central lesion. Now, somebody else is going to talk about stroke in detail, but I am going to talk about isolated situations like a brainstem lesion at the root entry zone of the vestibular nerve. This can mimic vestibular neuritis and has been rightly named as pseudovestibular neuritis as well. You get an abnormal head impulse test, just like in a peripheral disorder, with a horizontal torsional nystagmus to the healthy side. Now, how to make out the difference? While in vestibular neuritis, the onset is not so abrupt, but it's extremely hyperacute in case of this situation. And then you have to look for vascular risk factors in this kind of a situation. You have to think, you have to ask the patient about previous episodes of any neurological dysfunction like a plaque. Okay. Then hearing loss, you have to look for. Patient may not mention it because this relates to the cochlear nerve and its nucleus, which is in the neighborhood. Look for Horner syndrome, look for a facial paralysis, and of course a saccadic pursuit which points towards a cerebellum. Then another thing is isolated lesion of one vestibular nucleus. Here also you get a torsional horizontal nystagmus beating to the healthy side and a moderate caloric paresis also present to the affected side. But other things like smooth pursuit will be impaired and you will get an ocular tilt reaction from the upper half of the vestibular nucleus. An isolated cerebellar lesion, though very rare, and due to a unilateral lesion of the caudal cerebellum from a partial pica infarct. This also presents with a horizontal spontaneous nystagmus, but you have to look for things like head impulse test being normal, the calorics being normal, and there will be a gaze-evoked nystagmus beating in the direction opposite to that of the spontaneous nystagmus. All these things are important to rule out in difficult situations. Now, when do you ask for a neurological referral and a cerebral imaging? A patient who is above 65 years of age, older age group, pre-existing vascular disorders, a history of vascular risk factors like smoking, hypertension, diabetes, and high cholesterol, a normal head impulse test, or any neurological finding that does not explain vestibular neuritis. Now, first attack of vestibular migraine can be pretty tricky. In fact, vestibular migraine by itself is a very tricky disorder to diagnose. So just go back, ask history of the patient. If he can remember, he may not have mentioned, he might have had such a problem earlier. If the answer is yes, then vestibular migraine, vertebrobasilar TIA, and Meniere's disease are what form your differential diagnosis. And if the answer is no, still ask for similar attacks of lesser intensity. And even if it is a first attack, it can be vestibular migraine because vestibular migraine can present in all types of, with all types of peripheral and central nystagmus and even a central positioning nystagmus. First attack of BPPV. The patient may not come and tell you that he is getting this attack while getting into bed or turning in the bed or whatever, because his symptoms have really bothered him and he thinks he probably has a stroke. So the dictum is to do the diagnostic maneuvers on all patients who do not fit into vestibular neuritis or a posterior fossa stroke. Can it be a first attack of Meniere's? Yes, because very rarely, but Meniere's does present with monosymptomatic presentation. It could be monosymptomatic vertigo to begin with. Now, you have a patient with presentation which is acute, with no red flags and no clue to the diagnosis. Still, we got to take care of this patient. Treat him symptomatically, wait for spontaneous resolution, and start the vestibular rehabilitation therapy as soon as possible, as you would do for a vestibular neuritis patient. When the physical examination is entirely normal, so either the attack is just over. I won't go into detail. Dr. Surajit has taken care of it. Rely on the history, vestibular testing, audiometry. You do not find any prominent findings during the acute attack. It still could be vestibular migraine. Ask for additional features. The patient has non-vestibular dizziness rather than vertigo. Think in terms of other disorders not relating to our specialty. A hypertensive crisis, a hypoglycemia, or even a panic attack. Well, a patient with a past history of vestibular neuritis comes to you. He could be clinically normal on examination. The keys to finding out are use Frenzel's, preferably video Frenzel's. Do a head shaking nystagmus, which relies on the velocity storage mechanism, and you might get the nystagmus. head impulse is normal, could remain abnormal for life in these patients. So do a head impulse test and do a tandem Romberg. Now I get signs to say it's central, but the imaging is negative. Again, vestibular migraine comes at the top of the list as a possible culprit. Then comes TIA, drug toxicity, so drug history is also important. And early paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration, though rare, has to be kept in mind. A very small brainstem stroke, brainstem encephalitis, or a cerebellitis come into the differential diagnosis. Well, paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration is rare, but it occurs as a fallback of an autoimmune reaction of the neural tissue to a malignancy present elsewhere in the body. And more commonly, it is a lung cancer or a gynecological malignancy. And the MRI would probably show nothing in the early stages, but later, say 6 months down the line, you will get the enhancement along bilateral cerebellar sulci. So to keep all these things in mind, treating or managing an acute vertigo first episode. Now we come to recurrent vertigo. This is again often a difficult situation where the patient presents usually to us in the asymptomatic period and the physical examination is unrewarding. Well, the possible diagnoses are vestibular migraine, Meniere's, vertebrobasilar TIA, vestibular paroxysmia, and BPPV. So first, make sure it is really vertigo, or is it dizziness? Because you have to go into detailed history with the patient. It could be even a panic attack. Well, everything really depends upon history in vertigo. We all know it, but particularly so in this situation. Patient may not be giving a full description of his symptoms or might be missing out on the associated symptoms because the diagnosis relies on the type of vertigo, the combination of other symptoms, and the way it precipitates, and also the duration of the symptoms. So if the patient is unable to give you a history and it is a case of course, a recurrent vertigo, so it's likely to happen again. Ask the patient to maintain a dizziness diary before he comes back to you the next time. So both the patient and me may be wiser then. Well, this is just to show how duration helps in making a diagnosis. So a few seconds. So a few seconds would point to a different diagnosis. I'm not going to detail. We all know all this. Spend a couple of minutes on vestibular migraine because this is the most common diagnosis in isolated recurrent vertigo with no other added features. It's the most notorious in its presentation, could present as spontaneous spinning vertigo, could present as positional vertigo, or visually induced vertigo, or a head motion induced vertigo. But even in the absence of a history of migraine or its symptoms during the attacks, you should think of it. It may present in a very funny way. You have long-lasting attacks, lasting hours to days of spinning vertigo, which increase on head movement and change in position. And after that, the patient presents with pure positional vertigo, literally mimicking BPPV. Or a head motion induced dizziness or unsteadiness. So we have to be very particular in asking for specifically features of migraine. Patient may never volunteer, which usually is the case with most of our patients. And ask for features like association with menstrual cycle in female patients. The duration is 5 minutes to 1 hour in 20 to 30% of the cases, and it can be 50 to 70% cases. It could last for hours and days. That's what the literature tells us. And the cochlear symptoms may also appear in a few patients. What is required is a response to the trial of a prophylactic treatment, and that helps in confirming a diagnosis. Now, could it be Meniere's? Well, as I just said when I was talking about acute attack of vertigo, Meniere's can present as monosymptomatic presentation with isolated vertigo, and that could go on for even years. So depend upon the fact that duration is 20 minutes to a few hours, we should always do an audiometry on most of our patients to detect subclinical hearing loss. And it can also develop in patients which have already deafness from some other cause. And this cochlear symptoms of Meniere's may be masked. But then you have to look for, say, oral fullness and tinnitus. Now, is it Meniere's or migraine? I'm talking only about patients who are presented now with not a complete spectrum. Here, how to differentiate? Vestibular migraine, the hearing loss is non-progressive, usually milder as compared to mean ears, while mean ears, it begins at low frequencies and then it ultimately gives you a flat audiogram. Vertigo, mean ears can be only spontaneous, whereas in migraine, it can present in various forms. Now, vestibular paroxysmia also poses a diagnostic challenge characterized by very short attacks lasting few seconds only and several times a day, may or may not be associated with a hearing loss and tinnitus. The diagnosis is difficult even in the presence of a vascular loop found on MRI, because this is something which is an incidental finding in even MRIs done for other purposes. So again, just like vestibular migraine, our diagnosis depends on a trial of carbamazepine, and we should not hesitate doing so, because giving a drug for a few days does no harm to the patient, and we might land up with a correct diagnosis by doing so. Now, I don't have a definite diagnosis at all. I think, don't we all see such situations? Many times. Now, should I treat this patient? Why not? He deserves it. If the attacks are frequent and severe, give him treatment. And the most ambiguous, difficult diagnosis would be either a migraine or maybe a vestibular paroxysmia. So depending upon the circumstances, depending upon what the history is, what the symptomatology is, try a migraine prophylaxis, try carbamazepine, depending upon the situation. Now we move on to recurrent dizziness rather than vertigo. Okay, this is still more difficult for us ENTs, because what falls into this category is orthostatic hypotension, cardiac arrhythmias, panic attacks, and could be drug-induced. So to look into this. Well, the main thing about orthostatic hypotension is that the patient typically presents with a history that he gets it when he gets up from the bed, from a lying down position, or even while he's sitting and he suddenly gets up. So this is important. But some of them may present with a spinning sensation before they actually go into that fainting mode. So differentiation from positional vertigo, I've already said. In positional vertigo, most commonly due to BPPV, the patient would complain of spinning while going down supine, whereas here it gets it on getting out of bed. Cardiac arrhythmia can be possible in any position and would usually be associated with other things like palpitations, angina, dyspnea, etc. Panic attacks or psychogenic dizziness. When we are not able to reach a diagnosis, or the patient is not intelligent enough to convey what he really wants to, and it's very difficult to extract a history, what we say, okay, this could be put up as a psychogenic disorder. Please don't use it as a waste basket for undiagnosed patients. Must perform relevant vestibular investigations on these patients. Try to find out some pathology if possible. They are usually normal in these patients, except when there is a history of a previous vestibular insult, like a vestibular neuritis, or the patient has had a BPPV earlier. Of course, in BPPV, you'll not find anything in past BPPV. And then you refer him for a psychiatric consultation. Now, when I was talking about recurrent vertigo, I said, is it really vertigo or is it just dizziness? So the opposite situation occurs here when the patient says he's giddy, he's dizzy. Because the verbal representation of his symptoms is not the symptom itself. You have to dig in. Because milder forms of the vertigo may present as dizziness without the spinning sensation. Because visual fixation can help the patient to suppress the peripheral vestibular nystagmus. Take relevant history about previous rotatory vertigo, positional provocations, history suggesting oscillopsia, history of nausea even in the past, and again, this patient deserves a complete vestibular testing. Now moving on to positional vertigo. Now we'll talk only about the difficult situations. The history is suggestive, but the testing is impossible in this patient. Either the patient is not willing, or he has a very bad back or a very, very bad neck. Now, if the patient is not willing, then you can try an antiemetic or a sedative, calm down the patient, call him the next time, and then try the positional testing. And for patients with bad necks, bad backs, if it's not so bad, then I suggest the Gans maneuver not the time to describe it in detail, it's available in the literature. He has described a method in which there is much less strain on the patient and the doctor also. Okay. Now, you're getting a negative disc Hallpike. Either there's a spontaneous remission before the patient reaches you, or the patient is asymptomatic, but you can't elicit the vertigo or nystagmus. Then go ahead, test for the lateral canal at least. It might be the lateral canal. Or call the patient back again, try the testing on another day. You can even try after a little bit of head percussion, because sometimes what happens is that the particles are moving along the canal wall and the shearing force is not enough to make the endolymph move. Of course, we discussed the differential diagnosis of orthostatic hypotension already. Do not go exclusively by the patient's version. It's a bit of a repetition, but perform positional tests in all patients of recurrent vertigo or dizziness. The typical horizontal nystagmus or lateral canal BPPV can sometimes present when you are doing a Dix-Hallpike test. So please go by the nystagmus, not by the vertigo or any kind of nystagmus elicited during a Dix-Hallpike, which is the most common test that we all do. Again, a central vestibular lesion of the vestibular nuclei or caudal cerebellum can mimic nystagmus of the lateral canal. Always, this has already been discussed in the morning also, always assess a downbeat positional nystagmus neurologically and think of imaging if the corrective maneuver for anterior canal doesn't help. Vestibular migraine can present also as a positional vertigo. I already discussed it. This is a 20-second video to show you that when I was doing a left lateral roll in the McClure-Panini test on this patient, he presented with a right beating nystagmus first, followed by a downbeat nystagmus, and followed by a left beat nystagmus. So please don't carry it away. And he also had vertigo. So please don't get carried away by just nystagmus and vertigo. Go by the canal. See right beating, then it turns to down beating. I think left beating we could not show because we clipped it a bit too short. Now, don't think a patient with a past history of vestibular neuritis cannot develop BPPV. We all know that the superior division of the nerve is usually involved, the inferior is spared. So the posterior canal can always be involved in BPPV. I'm just going through situations which are usually sometimes missed. So in BPPV difficult situations, you're doing a positional test, no nystagmus, no vertigo. So the cause could be either a fatigue or a remission or a different etiology. You need to investigate further. You've done the positional test, you get vertigo, but no nystagmus. Do the liberatory maneuver, and if it results in resolution, it was a case of subjective BPPV. Done the positional test, vertigo is present, no nystagmus. Done the liberatory maneuver, no resolution. Please investigate further and think of the other etiologies. Now coming to the last leg of my lecture, that is chronic dizziness. In all likelihood, any one of us is not the first to be seeing this patient. He has already seen lots of other doctors, physicians, neurologists, ENTs, or even GPs. He comes to us with a bag full of investigations, relevant or irrelevant. And the complaint is of long-standing dizziness, imbalance, or giddiness. Two questions come to mind. What does he have and what can I do for him? So the possibilities are a bilateral vestibular failure, and here the points to be noted are bobbing oscillopsia on walking, worse in the dark, and a bilaterally abnormal head impulse test. Downbeat nystagmus syndrome has been already discussed, but what you have to look for the nystagmus, and also it is a very slowly progressive disorder, and vertical oscillopsia is also present. Is it a neurological gait disorder? In this category come peripheral neuropathy, spinal cord syndromes, and cerebellar and cerebral disorders. Orthostatic hypotension can present this way. The hallmark is that do a orthostatic blood pressure measurement. On standing up, there should be a drop of more than 20 millimeters mercury in the systolic blood pressure, and one test is not enough. You should have at least 3 readings. Chronic vestibular migraine we already discussed quite a lot. Poorly compensated vestibular disorder can also present as chronic dizziness because the compensation has not been enough. Persistent perceptual dizziness does need mention over here. There may be a history of vestibular insult, there may be a general medical disorder, or it may be a purely psychological thing. So try to find out the origin of this dizziness. Dig into the past history again and again with this patient, how it began. So you will get three types of patients. One who started with one or more attacks of rotatory vertigo to begin with in the past. One who comes and tells you that now I have this progressive history of disequilibrium. And the vague patient who has none of these. Here in this category, visual vertigo needs special mention because it has to be elicited by history alone. The symptoms usually worsen in busy surroundings. And it's also called the supermarket syndrome because when the patient is walking through the aisle of a supermarket with multiple shelves and he has too much being fed to the visual senses, or moving clouds, water moving in the river, or he is watching a movie with a car chase scene. These are the situations where he has too much of visual input. And this is the situation where he gets the vertigo. These patients are incidentally supposed to be visually dependent for balance and space orientation, so that they are too much dependent on the eyes vis-a-vis the vestibular system or the proprioception. And persistent postural perceptual dizziness also needs mention. And for diagnosis, persistent non-vertiginous dizziness should have been present for most days for more than 3 months. You have to look for symptoms of anxiety, phobia, or depression. And what are the provocative situations? You have to elicit that from the patient. The patient may be absolutely normal at home, but he has the problem only when he goes outdoors. And we do have to ask about a preceding vestibular insult. And there is a condition called MARD, migraine and anxiety related disorder. So yes, definitely this is an entity. Hope I'm not crossed it? Oh, sorry. I think I'll just finish fast. So finally, talking about bilateral loss of vestibular function, most patients will walk in uneventfully, and you need a high index of suspicion, oscillopsia on walking on bumpy roads, unsteadiness, worse in the dark. Head impulse will be impaired on both the sides, and dynamic visual acuity will be severely impaired, and standing on a rubber foam with eyes closed is impossible for this patient. I'll skip this now. Now, a gait disorder, a pure gait disorder vis-a-vis, is it in the head or here? A patient says he feels drunk, but his friends don't see it. Socially, he's all right. Then it is dizziness. The patient is unsteady, which is being noticed by the others, that he's falling and all. Then it's a gait disorder. Well, let's skip this also. So, to conclude, please don't miss out on a neurological or medical disorder. Seek a referral when you have a suspicion. Do positional tests in all your patients. Bilateral vestibular failure, you know how to diagnose. And don't miss out on migraine. Pay attention to psychological aspects during patient interview. And past history is as important as the present history. I'll skip this slide. Srinivas, can I show the video at the end or not? Okay. I want to end my talk with this beautiful video I had shot during my recent visit to Udaipur. And there's a problem coming vertigo. That is vertigo. So what I really wanted to show was how God gives such a wonderful gift of balance to some people that it's extraordinary vis-a-vis the balance disordered patient. That was the aim. So I think we'll save time here.
One question, if you see something like that, what is that called?
Sorry?
Is there a term for it? If a patient looks like that, sees the world like that momentarily, what is it called?
It's an ocular tilt.
Yeah. It's called room tilt illusion. Room tilt illusion. Okay. Momentary room tilt illusions are a little more commonly associated with central vestibular rather than peripheral vestibular. Okay. Thank you so much, sir.